What's going on, y'all? This is Alexander, and you are plugged in to the Nerd Companion. All right, we have Guion here.
What's up, y'all? How we doing?
We're going to nerd out. We're going to talk about, at least for me, I won't get super deep into it, but I have a couple writing projects in the works. But there's several influences in that, right? Lord of the Rings as a kid,
Sure.
Harry Potter, and I can't say any of that without talking about the Dark Tower series.
For those who don't know, Alex has tattoos. This is how serious he takes this. And I'm with you on that. I don't have tats, but I love it.
Yeah, they're, I don't know. if I went back and be like, yeah, don't get that tattoo.
No, it's great. I love it, dude. I
don't regret it. I'm just like, I don't really care.
I remember you showed me y'all were at your old place, and I remember I was like, dude, this is so fucking cool. I was just like, that's so freaking awesome, dude.
The Dark Tower, broken up into 7 books, right? 7
books, I believe.
The first of which is the Gunslinger.
How many times have you read the series, out of curiosity?
I've only read it one time.
Okay.
It's hard for me to go back and read a book, just simply because the time it takes. For me, I'm a slow reader.
Okay.
When I read things, I don't retain the information the first time I read it.
Yeah.
Like when I'm reading it, because sometimes my mind wanders.
Yeah.
I think that's, my brain's all jacked up.
Okay.
But I sometimes have to really put a lot of effort into focusing on what I'm reading and comprehending and imagining in my head. And so sometimes I have to reread sentences over again.
Yes.
So it takes me a little longer to read books, and I do enjoy it. But I don't even know where I was going with that. But so for me to go back and reread again, like there has to be nothing else for me to read, because I already have so many books on my backlog.
Yeah.
I'm not going to waste my time rereading it.
Yep.
Do you know what I mean?
I know that.
Unless my wife was like, hey, I really want to read the Dark Tower series. And I'm like, fuck yeah, let's do that. You know what I mean? Like I'll go through that journey again.
I know exactly what you mean.
You know, anybody that's like, I want to read this. There's several people at work that want to do a book club, and I've pitched The Gunslinger. I think it's because there's like a couple of people that read Stephen King but never read The Gunslinger.
Okay.
And I feel like the series as a whole, I feel like the series has little lulls in the series. Okay. Or like little lulls, but I feel like overall it's a very good story.
Yes. I'd love to hear about those. We'll get into that.
The lulls?
The lulls that you think. I want to hear these critiques.
So have you read a lot of Stephen King?
I have read...
Stephen King, I'm sorry. So yeah, the Dark Tower series is written by Stephen King.
Yes, for those listening. I have read maybe 3 to 4 other books outside of that series. I've just did Fairy Tale. I don't know if you've read that.
I did. We can talk about that
too. I really
too.
liked Fairy Tale, yeah.
Oh, man.
I read that. I shouldn't say just. I read that as soon as it came out. I read it.
I read it last year, I think.
Yeah.
But I don't know
it came
when
out last year.
Did it really?
Yeah,
okay.
It came out last year, if not the year before, but I read it as soon as it came out.
That'd make a really good Disney movie.
It really would.
That's like a
what's
Disney
weird
movie,
is
but for adults.
The creature in the end, he tells it so scary that it's like, I don't know how they'd have to dumb it down because it sounds so horrible.
I was getting Cthulhu vibes from him. Man.
I was getting Cthulhu-ish vibes, but it's like, it's almost more like, I don't know, I have to read it back. But I remember just when I was imagining this creature in my mind, it was like just this like freaky looking thing.
I was getting like, go ahead.
Yeah, but no, that's like, that's very much the vibes for sure, that I think that it's in that vein.
Like a dark Disney fairy tale.
Yes.
Is really what it was.
It's cool how he's like slowly is changing into this mythical, fairy tale Arthur.
Or yeah. Or
literally an
something.
Arthur, He's turning into a knight basically, or the prince, which I thought was really cool. So it would make for such a good Disney movie.
Yeah.
Like, that would really be cool.
It really reminded me of the Dark Tower in a sense of the interdimensional relationships of the universe running parallel with each other. And then the Dark Tower is that there's all these events that are running parallel with each other that feels wordly apart, but it's really only like a hairline away, just right on the other side of the universe.
Yes. Yeah.
And so it's really interesting. And I think that was one of the first books that I read that had a multiverse.
I think that is my first foray into that as well, is the Stephen King stuff, into like multiverses and all of that. I think so.
So what other Stephen King books have you read?
Gosh, I'd have to actually look.
I've read Salem's Lot, It, Fairy Tale, The Outsider, and Pet Sematary on my list.
Okay. Did you watch The Outsider?
No.
Okay. I've watched.
Is it a good show? It's an HBO
it was a great show.
Right?
Yeah.
So show.
I'm sure the book is going to be. I'm more of a book than a show / movie guy. So I'm sure the book is going to be killer. Let me see what else I've done. But it's such a good story, The Outsider. So it's highly recommended. Yeah, I think that might be it. Have I only read The Dark Tower plus Fairy Tale? I feel like there's one more book he did.
I want to read what is it? The big. It's a huge book. It's about the JFK assassination. 11, 16, 20 or something like that.
There was a show.
It was really good.
You watched it?
It was a very emotional show.
Oh, nice.
Have you not seen it?
No. It's got
then
James Franco. Right,
read the book. Okay. I'm sure the book is better, but I feel like if you're going to leave an interpretation of a book, it's better to do it in a show than it would be a movie. Sure. And I feel like the show was really good. I'm sure the book is better, but that's on my reading list. I can see Dina reading that. Yeah, that one, and then Pet Sematary, and then The Outsider is the next couple books I gotta read.
Billy Summers is the other one.
What the heck is that, dude?
Yeah, I had to look it up. I was like, I know there's one more book I just read.
What is that
It's
about?
about an assassin, and it's actually pretty solid. Yeah, it's called Billy Summers. It's Stephen King, and he's basically like, it just like you drop into the middle of this guy's life as he's an assassin, and it's just him basically trying to get out of the game, one last job kind of thing.
It's always one last job.
Always one.
You can't take him out of the game.
Job. Yeah, and it was really solid. It was just kind of a good, like, probably for him it was like, hey, I want to do something that's not horror or not, best, and it was just a good, like, interesting, like,
you know what's crazy is that I feel like a lot of people think that Stephen King's books is nothing but horror, but every one that I've essentially read, I never get horror vibes. Like even when I read that, like I didn't feel like it was a horror book.
Interesting.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know.
I need to read it. My brother was big on that too. He's
it's like, supernatural for sure.
Yeah.
But even, I would say Salem's Lot's probably the only one that's more, and I guess maybe The Shining too. It's probably horror. I don't know what I'm talking about. I just like what I like.
No, but I mean, from a reading perspective, it reads different than watching for sure too. So like that's a big part of it, which is why I'm such a book guy over movies. Like it's just hard to fit everything that makes the book what it is in a film or even a TV show. So like it's always book over movie for me generally.
There's a lot of back information that's not really told.
Oh yeah,
and you're just kind of like,
don't get me started. Like Harry Potter, dude, I will curse the fourth book / movie. It's like they're so far off from each other that I just can't. I'm like, it's too much.
So the Gunslinger,
book one.
I love the opening. I don't feel like there could have been a more direct, epic opening as the first like the first sentence in that book.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
What's the sentence?
It should be the man in black fled and the gunslinger followed or something like that. Yeah.
It gave you the direct objective of what he was going to be doing.
Yes. This is what drives him, in the current setting. And I think he wrote that book as a short story far before he did the rest, if I remember correctly. He submitted it and it ended up becoming a thing. And it's almost like maybe, and I know he has said this himself, but he probably didn't have the fully formed idea of what Roland was going to be doing. So he is so one track minded. And I think he might mention the Dark Tower in the thing a little bit, but he's not like crazy Dark Tower like he is as the books progress.
He's centerpiece.
Like psychotic about it. Yeah. So it is very much like, I have to get this man. Like it's all that it's about, so.
Well, I think also, I don't think it's ultimately revealed. Like I think he understands that the Dark Tower is at the center of it all, but it's not ultimately revealed. Yes. And Roland, as the gunslinger, like his backstory is that he comes from an ancient line that resembles the not the fairy tale, but the mythological story of King Arthur, and our literature is in our actual reality here on Earth.
Right.
But he is essentially this kind of knight, but instead of using swords and shields, he's basically like a Western bounty hunter.
Yeah.
Who is ultimately described as Clint Eastwood.
Yeah.
In a sense, he's basically just like Clint Eastwood.
Exactly, yeah.
Like not Dirty Harry, but like,
one of those types for sure. It's like this guy who's a hero of good, old Western gunslinger, if you will, which is kind of the vibe.
And he has no imagination, which is said so many times throughout the book, is that, as good as you are with your skills, you lack imagination, and that will be your downfall.
He always says he can't think around corners, which I love that way of Stephen King saying that.
Is he autistic? You think he's autistic?
I don't know. That's a good question.
He's got that superhero touchatism.
You're right, the superhero touchatism. I don't know. That is a good point, but he's at times throughout the book, the way he thinks helps him, and when they go back in time, for those who, I'm actually on book 4 right now. For
you reading again?
Oh, dude, I'm on my 5th read. This is
your 9th read?
5th read. It's like my 5th read of the book. I love that. Yeah, I'll go over the whole thing of all the books. I'll just run.
So you're going to trump me with information on the Gunslinger then?
But I audiobook it. So it's like, because I'm the same way. If I read actual physical books, it's so hard for me to focus in, and I have to reread same exact thing. But audiobooks, and what's weird is Stephen King said he loves the medium of audiobooks because it's something about the way you retain the information. He said something about that.
I do not retain information from audiobooks very well at all. Not at all.
So not at all.
I can do like a podcast is easy because it's just a conversation you're having. But if you're wanting me to immerse myself in your world, I'm too distracted and I'm looking at things on the road.
Yeah.
And I'm not doing what the reader wants me or the author wants me to do.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I can't really, I can do an audiobook if I'm reading with it. But even then it's like, kind of distracting.
Yeah, no.
There's times in, I don't know, it just depends.
Yeah.
But I'm not a good audio learner. I don't retain information in audios. I have to look or do it.
Yeah. So for me, I'm very much like on the audio side of things, but I forgot what we were talking about right before that, but
you do the audiobooks, that's how you're doing on your fourth read.
Yes, but the fourth read was pertaining to something else, which the listeners will be like, oh, y'all were talking about this. But either way,
some about him getting out of situations because
and thinking around corners. Like, it goes back into when he was younger on the fourth book. The way he thinks actually helps him at times. So it's like that's an interesting thing where it's like he considers himself kind of missing that part of like being able to be clever or strategize beyond a certain level instead of kind of like what's bluntly right in front of him.
He got Eddie for that.
Exactly. He's got Eddie. He's got Cuthbert whenever he was younger. You know, he has those guys who think a little bit different in those moments. So, yeah, which is an interesting thought altogether. I'm curious your take on, spoiler alert, if you haven't already caught on to that, listeners. Have you thought about how, like, the people are almost like a redo of his previous cast who he had? So, like, he had Jake, who's like Elaine with a touch, and then he has Eddie, who's like Cuthbert.
Who's kind of like
with
reemerged
the wise ass, who's more clever in that way, who reemerged in a different way. Like, I wonder
if that has to do with Ka as a circle coming back around.
Right, exactly.
Like, and it's almost like existential. You think he is this hero who is so, as you said, psychotic and hyper focused on this dark tower. It's almost like it's his fate. I wouldn't even say destiny, but was made to do this thing.
Right.
And even though things were stripped from you to your journey here, you're still going to have the same tools that will come back and aid you from your weaknesses.
Right. And there's a part in the thing, and this is like, if I could ever meet Stephen King, this is the only question I would ask him, is like, is Roland's journey, and I probably have like 10 questions, but is Roland's journey, is that what is keeping the world together? Because, spoiler alert again, if you're not paying attention, but when he gets to the end, and I love that Stephen King did this, he's like, the story's done. You don't have to go any further.
Yeah.
But I know you will.
He broke the third wall.
He broke the third wall and lets you choose if you want to really find out what really truly happens, or you can end with more of a happy ending. You find out that...
Well, hold on.
Do you not want to?
Let's talk about the Gunslinger.
Okay.
Because we can go through.
Yeah.
Hold on, we can go through.
The reason I asked that, though, is at the beginning of... It goes... We'll just say... We'll skip it, but at the beginning of the story...
We're not gonna spoil the very, very ending, because I do intend on going through these books individually with you, whether that be
we'll go back
remotely or whatever,
so listeners aren't like, wait.
So the premise of the story is very evident from the very first couple paragraphs: is that Roland Deschain is a gunslinger that is essentially the same thing as a knight in what we would consider the Arthur tale, and he's chasing after the Man in Black, and you're not really sure why he's doing that, but you know that he's motivated. And Stephen King wants you to know that he's motivated to do it because that's literally the first sentence. He's being objectively clear on what the goal is.
Sure.
Here, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
What are some of your favorite parts? If we can go in order to the story here.
Yes.
So if you're reading this, let's just do this. If you are someone that's recommending this book to somebody,
yes,
what would you rate it 9 out of 10 before we go into the details and spoilers and stuff?
Yes.
If someone were listening to this and they haven't read it, but they don't want the spoilers, what would you say about The Gunslinger as a standalone book that would encourage people to read it?
I would give it a 7.8 or something.
I feel like that's a strong rating.
Out of 10. Which is, it's a strong rating. I think there's parts like, so if you're just starting to read the book, you know he's going through the desert to get to the town of Toll. And that part to me feels slow. And then after he leaves the town, there's like, and it's not too
Those were the
slow.
lulls I was talking about.
Yeah. There's some lulls that in that first book where, I mean, it was written, I don't think it was written to be something else than what it is. So like, it's this kind of short story kind of thing. So it's
like a novella. It's like only like 190 pages.
Right.
Not very long.
It's a shorter thing. So like, it's not like the book is too draggy or anything. It's just, I don't know. In the overall story, it just feels kind of like there's extra stuff. He meets travelers along the way, and I think they may come back later in the series at times to kind of let you understand it's like there
was a purpose for that drop,
right? And like the world's kind of falling on itself, if you will, or whatever those things are. But it still feels kind of like unnecessary, or as fat, you could say. Like you could kind of trim the fat, if you will. But I would say it's amazing. I mean, like the town of Toll. To me, it's so cinematic. Like what ends up happening. I don't know if we want to go into it or not for the readers, but.
So you give it a 7 out of 10.
Yeah, it's 7. We'll say 7.5 out of 10.
I give it a 7.
Okay.
And the very ending, because no one told me anything about it. I had a guy tell me, just read this book.
Yeah,
it's about this vaguely. I read it.
Yeah,
and then at the end of the book, whenever he's having that conversation,
yeah,
I had that meme GIF moment where a guy's going,
Yeah.
the head is exploding.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about the plot and the narrative as it unfolds in the story. So at this point forward, listeners, if you haven't read the book and you don't want spoilers, I would go put this down and then read the book and then maybe come back and listen.
Yeah.
After that,
and as a precursor before we get into this, I can't think of the word. Obviously, we haven't just read the book, so there's probably stuff we'll miss for like a true like hardcore diehard who's like, no, it's, you forgot this part. It's like, we'll do our best to remember. But yeah, so he starts off, he meets the traveler on the way to the town, who is, I forget his name, but he has the bird. Zoltan, thank you. Look at you. You said you wouldn't be able to remember. You're already on it. He has the bird Zoltan.
I lied.
Stephen King sets it out to where like he doesn't trust anyone, and he doesn't know if they've already been glamored, if you will, by the man in black who he's chasing.
What's glamour mean?
Just turned under his will, if you will, or been possessed in some way, mind controlled by the wizard.
Who doesn't like run around in a wizard's hat? Like, don't think he's. Like, for anyone that's like, I can't get into this because it's a wizard. Fantasy's lame. Yeah. Like, no, it's a wizard, like
a dark sorcerer, if you will. Yeah. One who has magical powers. But
I imagine he's running around like Palpatine in his cloak.
Yeah,
he's just like running through the desert.
I like that. It's all hot, like
just like a gliding like robe.
I love that the Stephen King immediately kind of gives you, he does so great at like giving you little hints about the world. So when he meets the traveler, the farmer, if you will, he asks him like all these questions and the guy doesn't know. He's like, he asks him like, what happened when he came? He's like, I can't remember. And like all these things where he's like, the world's changing and like, we're losing a track of time basically. So they keep saying the world's moving on throughout all the books. And it basically means that like time is, if you will, stretching and warping.
Yeah.
So that you're like forgetting things, and something that was yesterday seems like it was years ago. And it's really interesting how he's setting that up really off the jump. Like as soon as you meet this character, you're already like, oh, this is pretty crazy. Like, okay, something weird is happening in this world.
Yeah. And so I think at this point he is talking to, I believe the character is Brown, and what does he do? He does Brown openly ask Roland like what happened, because we don't know, because this is the events after Toll.
Oh yes,
yeah.
Yes,
so like so we kind of have like this flashback. So he's chasing the man in black, and chronologically it goes like this: he's chasing the man in black, where the story sets in. He goes to a town of Toll, but when he's entering this town of Toll, you don't know about it, because all you know is chasing him, and then he meets Brown. And when he meets Brown, the story kind of does like a flashback to Toll, which takes place in between the first sentence of the book and him meeting the character, if that makes any sense.
Yes.
So he kind of has like this recollection of what happened right before he met this character.
Yes. I totally spaced on that. That's very true. It is a flashback to the town of Toll. So in order, he's technically already been to the town of Toll before that. But yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. So what had me intrigued whenever I was reading this book for the first time was that you understood that this necessarily wasn't taking place in our world, right? It's in a made up reality, right? And he gets to this place called Toll, and so that's solidified that this is not like a real place. But when he enters the saloon, you have someone playing on the piano, Hey Jude, by the Beatles.
Yeah.
And so immediately you're like, well, this is odd. It's like Frodo walking into Rivendell and they're singing Chainsmokers.
Yeah, exactly.
Like there's like a pop culture reference in this book that I'm not sure why this is here.
Yeah.
But it's there for a reason.
Yes.
And so it alludes that, I don't even know if it alludes at that point yet.
No, I think it's just a little taste, which is, again, talking about how Stephen King does these little things to kind of like
trickle in there.
Yeah, to flick your mind. Yeah, a little like, wait a second. And it's setting you up for books down the road even. I don't even know, again, if in book one it even brings up anything else about it.
I think he had an idea that he wanted it to run parallel to our world.
He must have, yeah.
But I don't think that he had a clear picture of where he was going or direction.
Right. Because, by the time you get you mentioned Wolves of the Calla, by the time you get there, it's like he's going to have licensing issues when it's time to do it on TV. Because it's like,
oh my God.
It's like, how are you going to, it's like, how are you going to show all this stuff?
I didn't even know, like, when they were talking about the weapons.
Yeah.
Because they were explaining it, and they were explaining it without saying it. I don't want to say it, but like, whenever they're explaining the weapons, I was like, that's weird. And then when they said actually what it was with the trademark name, I'm going, can you do that? Yeah,
that's exactly right. So I'm curious to see that. But yeah, it's exactly the same thing. Like, so it's really cool that he started that early. Like he knew that it would take place in some way, shape, or form if he didn't already have kind of a roadmap with that. But yeah, I love how immediately into the thing, and you may have a better grasp on what happens next exactly, but I know from that time, the moment he enters in, it's very Gunslinger into a saloon kind of vibe. Very cool thing. He sits down. I don't even know if he has to actually kill the guy, but he sits down down and orders like meat. He gets like burger meat or something, and they cook it up, and they're so poor and destitute in the town that the smell of meat, like that no one else can afford but him, this guy gets all crazy. And I think the guy like comes up to him and like is about to talk some shit. Yeah, but I can't remember if he just shows the weapon or...
I think he brandishes the...
Yeah, and it's enough to be like, back the fuck up kind of shit, which I love. Yeah, it's like...
He saw the hilt. Yeah. There was a design on the hilt that showed that he was like the Eld, like he's from the Eld family.
Yeah, and it was like, oh, okay, it's a sandalwood grips, as they say over and over again in the book. So it's like, okay, like he's not playing around, which is such a badass thing to begin with, right? Like, it's also cinematic the way it's written, but I love that. And then I can't remember, and if you have the direction, feel free to lead us, but I can't remember from there it goes to... him asking what happened, and had the man in black already come through and possessed one of the dudes who died from he died from the weed, from eating the weed. I can't remember if he
Lechuga de Diablo. What's it called? Devil grass?
Is that what it's called? Devil grass?
It's cannabis.
Yeah, right? Yeah, exactly.
The way that he describes it, I'm not sure if it's cannabis, because they're all doing like crazy things.
It's like, because it poisons you ultimately. Yeah, but yeah, it's
people are doing it.
Yeah,
it's it's basically like a psychoactive. Yeah, it's like an LSD drug, but it's poisonous.
Yes, I think they call it devil weed or something. But yeah, so the man in black comes to the town, which is going to be, again, like it can make for such great film. Please do this right when you do it, producers or whomever.
I don't think anyone's going to do it.
He possesses the man, and it's just a creepy thing when you kind of get this true understanding of the man in black and kind of like what his powers are and what he can do. It becomes such an interesting part of the story. And from that point, I don't want to get lost on the exact order, but he ultimately hooks up with the barmaid, basically, and
he's got to get some on the way, dude.
He's got
right. You're alone, dude.
Throughout his time, he gets it in every now.
I mean, the dude's not out there getting strange in the desert.
That's right.
He's been walking the desert for knows how long. He came to town. He knew exactly what he was going to do.
Right.
He was going to get some salted meat, a shot of whiskey, and come here, baby girl.
Right. I'm like, I hope he took a bath first, dude. Like,
no, dude,
probably
sweaty. Sweaty, swarty bones, but he's a gunslinger.
It's okay.
He's a gunslinger.
Bro, for real. No, but yeah, so he really cool that he meets her. But I can't remember if before this or after, but she ultimately has her run in with the man in black, and he whispers a number to her.
Oh, even to this day, they still can't figure out a clear meaning for what that is.
The number?
Yeah.
Yeah, I had thoughts on it.
What's the number?
The number is 19, and he tells her the moment that you utter this out loud, basically that you will see the true universe open up and for you. So he's basically put a spell on her, and what they call like a sleeper cell. When they talk about the Mark or the Mark Ultra, Mark II Ultra, yeah, like the Manchurian Candidate. Like, I'm going to say a word to you, and you'll immediately snap. He basically hits her with one of those, but he tells her like if the moment you say it out loud, and she knows it though, like she knows what it is in this instance, and she knows if she says it, basically it'll undo her mind because it'll open her up to the truth of the universe, basically, which would be too much for any human mind to comprehend. And
which they don't even really talk about, give you an idea what it is. Right. It's just kind of like this vague, general, thing that just happens in your mind.
Yes. And Roland tries to tell her, like, do everything you can to forget it. Whenever it's coming out, like, forget that number exists. It goes from 18 to 20. Like, literally tries to tell her, like, do whatever you can because it will kill you. It will, destroy you. And I think he says something like, I've never known him to be a liar. Like, he's not a liar of all things. So
yeah, as big of a piece of shit he is, he's not a liar.
He's not a liar. Like, it is going to mess your brain up. I promise you. So eventually, of course, that happens, but that's a little bit later in the story. But the whole 19, just to give a thought on that, I had a theory that it had to do with the year we were in, 1900s, and then this is leading up into later in the books, but at some point it has to do with us being on this path of the 1900s. And then when you were in, for instance, say, I can't give the story away. So for the listener, I think it has something to do with the year, like the 1900 years that we're in, the century. But anyways,
we're on.
Okay. Are we on? Are we live?
We're live. We're hot.
Cutting out the spoiler alerts for all those listening. Really interesting part there. I love that, they kind of set you up for like, ooh, what's going to happen with that? Of course, they have a little moment together and stuff. I'm trying to remember everything that happens from there, but I know...
It doesn't have to be completely detailed.
There's a really cool section where he introduces this woman who's been possessed by the man in black, who's like this preacher, if you will.
He impregnated her.
Did he impregnate her?
That's what, yeah.
Oh, okay. I don't even remember that part of the story. Yeah, so you may want to...
No, that's just all it said. Like someone, okay. I think it was just conversation. Like,
yeah,
like he was like, even if you look on like like fandom. It says like he had impregnated her.
Wow. Okay.
I'm not sure if that was like just an extreme way to describe how he's infiltrated her mind, or did he like smash? So I'm not really like sure. It just said he impregnated her and she's now forever changed. So I'm not sure if that was like physical intercourse or, which doesn't surprise me because later on in the story there's like weird stuff like that happens. But so it wouldn't surprise me if the Man in Black did have sex with her.
Yeah, not at all.
And I think the biggest thing about that is like you have a person from the church, someone that's supposed to be pious, and then you still have a sorcerer who can break her will with her pious beliefs and still seduce her and then corrupt her at the same time.
Which is such a cool thing. So like the first time Roland goes to the church and walks in.
This is still in Toll.
She is worked up by the, she's already been, changed, if you will, by the Man in Black. And it's so really interesting to think about this world where you walk in and she's like possessing the parishioners, if you will. Like she's imbued by the powers of the Man in Black and she's possessing these parishioners, kind of setting them up for
She got a little slice of that power.
And she's just willing them already, which is so freaking awesome. And then she comes back whenever Roland goes back, once the town is about to really kick off, which is, again, I could give you a full on movie direction for how this is going to go. It's all so badass, but I don't remember what happens in between that and him coming back.
It's like it's just those events. Like he sees the girl, they go do their thing, and then he hears about you're soaking in the saloon, like what's going on with the piano, what are people doing? Like people are looking at him. He goes up, has his moment with the girl. I'm not sure if a night has gone by or he comes back down or if that's the correct order, but eventually it comes down to the point where she's basically the leader of the local church in Toll,
she's
and
like
he comes out,
pastor, if you will,
and while all this is going on, she's already basically mind flaying all the parishioners and the people of the church who are there for what you would call like a sermon. And basically doing what?
Turning them into zombies, if you will, zombies for the Man in Black, or mindless psychopaths, if you will. Eventually Roland goes in and she, if I remember correctly, did she try to seduce him or something like that? Or they talk about him feeling like the pull like sexually towards her at some point. And he I can't remember what he does exactly, but it gets kind of strange in that way.
He's like, girl, I've already been drained. Don't waste my time.
Already busted, man. But it's really cool how he eventually, I think he kills her right then and there, if I remember correctly, but I
can't remember. It was a straight headshot from like point blank.
Yeah, it's
like,
something.
and it something happened. I remember it was very anime-y in my head, where he's like, and like she's like floating off, and and the things are going off. She's like still floating. And his cloak is like blaring back while he's like, very anime-y. Like,
and that's a tribute to Stephen King too, because he does give you such great description, even in something like someone getting shot. Like she flew back, her legs went over her head, landed, smoke coming. Like it gives you the full detail, so you understand. Oh, okay, like he flipped her over with a gunshot. Like literally, it was insane.
And it's evident that these guns are more powerful than normal guns. They're
it's like 50 cal pistols he's walking around with. Like
and they're not described as so. But the power of the gun, not sure if it's mystical or if it's Roland or whatever. There's something more going on with these guns. And I don't think that's ever explained.
Sometimes like chunks of a person are blown off, where it's like, damn, dude, like what's up with these bullets, dude? Like shot his whole arm off, or like a chunk of his head goes flying off.
Bone and sinew just flying everywhere.
It's like, all right, that's not a simple bullet you just got hit with, but which is so cool. I'm curious to see, because another part of the book, you start to learn that Roland is insanely fast with his guns at reloading them. And they always say your hands are doing their little trick. He always says it over and over again because it's such a like insane thing to see. I'm really curious to see how they'll do that. I never watched the Dark Tower movie, for those listening. Just to wrap it up, I mean, after Roland goes and kills the priestess, he goes back into the town, and the cool thing is he sets you up with this really cool scene, and he explains that it's almost like there's like this, I see this like purplish, like eerie glow over the town. Because he talks about going back to the church and it looks dark, and there's like I think he mentions like a purplish glow. This isn't my mind, maybe. It could just be how I see it.
This is the magic of books.
It's the magic of books, dude, how I've built it. But I just see this like dark, smoky night with like a purplish kind of hue. And he's looking around and he's like, okay, it's way too quiet in here. He goes into the bar that he was in, and it's empty, completely dead. Steps outside, and I believe he maybe hears something or realizes there's like people. Because Roland has, for those who don't know, he has next level intuition, understanding if someone's staring at him, understanding if he's being watched, those kind of things. He has like next level
he's like
sense.
He's like a superhero without being a over the top like superhero.
Yes,
He's like
super heightened senses.
Like Spider-Man.
Yes.
He's quick. He's got like these supernatural abilities, but he's not like an unstoppable superhero.
Right. Exactly.
He's very human.
Yes.
And you find out very soon in the second book, but he's very human.
Exactly.
And I think that was probably purposely done to, if you read it and you're like, oh, this guy's unstoppable.
What's the point?
Yeah.
Kind of
So
thing.
we'll get to that later.
What is it? That's so true. Yeah. I wonder if that was his.
I don't know.
It might have been though.
I felt bad when it happened. I was like, what?
Oh, dude, I was shook.
I'm like, no, it's book 2.
I was shook.
We got 5 more books after this, dude.
I was shook. I was like, this makes no sense. But as the story goes, it's really badass, and it's again leans to what you're talking about.
What
how
happens
he has to lean on the people.
Yeah. So in Tull, he
steps outside. Dusk, night, dead, no one's around. Then all of a sudden, the entire town of Tull has been turned into mindless zombies, if you will. I don't want to say zombies because they're full on running, coming to murder
World War
him.
Z. Like World War Z people.
Closer to World War Z is how I'd see it exactly.
Are they zombies? Is it describing them as zombies, or like are they still human? They're just like mindless and running after
they're still human, right? Like they're not dead. Right, they're just like berserko mode. Yeah, they're just berserko mode. I think that he says like they're something about like how they look, like their face is like there's no life in their face. It's just like like they're just all coming to attack him. There's no like understanding, I guess, in their face.
Do you remember how many there were? There was like I was thinking somewhere like 40 people or something like that.
He says it. Do you remember?
I don't, but I remember being like, if I'm thinking of like a small town, I'm thinking at least 40 people.
Yeah, it's more than that though. It's more than that. I forget, but he says like a number. He's like at the end, 75 adults, 12 children, and all that. Like he says a number of like,
he does kill the children.
He kills
the children.
The kids are trying to kill him too. Yeah, which is nuts. So
which just shows you that Roland does not discriminate.
Right.
He will not. He's cold and calculated. If he's got a goal, and that goal is to catch a man in black, if you step in his way, a little foreshadowing.
That's it.
And then, and
even inside book 1, it's foreshadowing. Very much so.
He will drop you to get to his goal.
Yeah, he ain't playing around, which is nuts because
he's supposed to be the hero.
Right. Exactly. He's very much in a sense like he has anti-hero tendencies as the book goes on. It feels that way where you're like, God, I do, because he's the main character, you obviously feel for him, but at times you're like, God, you're a piece of shit, dude. Yeah. But as far as that stuff goes, obviously these kids everyone's brandishing knives and trying to murder him. They're all possessed.
Absolutely.
So it's like, whatever, you got to do what you got to do, my friend. But which is so badass. If you haven't read the book, Stephen King goes into basically how insanely fast and gifted Roland is with taking these people out or anybody out, just letting them fly left and right, reloading like a freaking madman. So cool. But yeah, that's the whole town of Tull is laid to rest by Roland.
Just a road of bodies.
And he's chased through the town by these people. So you can imagine him flipping over saloons, falling into freaking through windows into another place, getting chased, attacked through, falling out of the back of another place. So just kind of imagine taking it through like an old Western town at night.
But done by like a Marvel Universe choreographer.
Right, exactly. And it seriously reads that way. It reads so cinematic. It's just like, whoa, that's really cool. So that's just such a cool story of him being like literally chased through the town, murdering this town of people trying to kill him, finally gets them all taken out and decides, okay, I can leave the town. I think he goes back and gets some meat at the end. It says like, walks back into the bar, gets the meat.
Why not?
Food. You have to.
I mean,
man.
What is these dead people going to eat it?
Right.
I probably would have taken everything. I'd have been taking ammunition.
Exactly.
I'd have loaded up my water skins again.
Oh yeah. Which I'm sure he did all that and then hits the road.
And so you have that recollection, and then it goes back to present time, and he's sitting in front of Brown, the man who is confused on why he's here, and he's kind of like in this. Is it the way station?
That's coming up.
That's later.
Yeah, he leaves.
So he's
Brown
like this random person that's out there with his little raven. He's just kind of clueless, and so he's talking to this guy, and I want to say that the crow reminded him of what happened in Tull when he sees the man's crow, and that's how you get that recollection of Tull.
Okay.
But I might be making that up. I'm sure I'll get slammed on it.
Yeah.
If my -3 listeners comment on it. But so he goes on, and then he goes to the way station, and he encounters another character who will play as a main character in this book.
Meets Jake
Chambers.
John Jake Chambers.
So does Jake know how he ended up here?
I think at this point of the story, he remembers that he was being pushed.
Okay. I know that's the story, but I wasn't sure if Jake explains that to him, or does Roland sense that?
Yes. I think Roland asks him like where he came from. And I think he says like the last thing I remember, I think he even says like I was walking through the street and I was pushed. Or something
he was on his way to school.
Yeah. So you find out very quickly that he was
in New York City. In our time.
Our time.
Or not our time, but our reality.
Yeah, our reality. And he gets pushed onto the street, and he gets killed and wakes up in our world, basically. So
and all world is the world that Roland lives in. All world, ALL world.
He gets and it's funny because I said our world, and I'm like, no, wait.
I thought you said all world.
No, but it is all world. So that's funny. That's funny that I was saying it wrong.
I thought that you said
it's not ours, but their world. But it is all world. So yeah, he wakes up there. Basically, that's your first understanding that like, okay,
there's a connection between our reality and Roland's reality.
Yes.
And that's where you go back and you're like, oh, they were playing Hey Jude on the piano. So there's a connection here that will be made probably more frequently as the series goes on, which is, to me, when I remember reading that, I'm going, holy shit, dude. Because it reminded me of The Matrix. It reminded me of The Matrix. There's like two different places where you can kind of like come in and out in different places, like how they use the program to drop in. And
I love that. I
so,
didn't think about that.
So I was like, that was the way to kind of describe this as like a dark Western fantasy mixed with like dimensional Matrix vibes. Like it was really kind of hard to
stuff.
It's so unique, and that's why I think it was so good, is because it's nothing like that has ever been at least that I know of that has been written at least in a very big way.
And for those who don't know, Stephen King says that this series is his number one like work, his
magnum opus.
His magnum opus. This is his thing. And he ties in other stories into it as you go through.
And his whole multiverse.
And other of his, his other stuff in it. So, which was really cool. But, so he meets Jake. Before he leaves with Jake, because he explains kind of what he's doing. I think Jake is scared, doesn't fully trust him at the time, but he explains like, well, I'm leaving. And Jake, as a scared little kid, is like, okay, well, I better go with you because I don't want to be here.
So I think when Roland got there, he was like drained.
Yeah. And
he ran out of water. He like eaten most of his meat.
Exactly.
It's been a long trek since he's made it to the way station.
Right.
Which it goes through like kind of like the lulls I'm talking about in the story.
Throughout that. Exactly. And Jake had seen the Man in Black and had hid from him. I remember he mentioned he was scared at the way station. So
so Man in Black went to where Jake was before Roland had made it there.
Right.
And remember that Roland is chasing the Man in Black. So the Man in Black left while Jake was hiding from the Man in Black.
Right.
And then comes Roland and then finds Jake. I'm not sure if he was hiding or not. But Jake ends up essentially, I'm not sure how he has access to it, but I think he's like replenishing his stuff.
I think there's a pantry or there's like a thing down there, and that's where they find the speaking demon before they leave. So before he leaves,
I forgot about that. Tell us about the speaking demon.
Yeah, so I can't remember how the demon shows himself, but which is a really cool, again, Stephen King adding some really cool stuff into the world. But there's a demon basically like trapped in this wall, if you will, if you imagine like a downstairs basement that carries their food and everything. And of course, Jake is petrified of this. He's a kid, and Roland, of course, having been trained on dealing with demons, goes down. More or less, I forget what he does to kill the demon. I don't remember what his method is, but either he shoots it or he does something. Of course, Roland's guns are blessed from Gilead, and in some way or shape, form, kills the demon, and he takes the jaw. He reaches his hand into the wall and pulls out the jaw of the demon. So he has the demon's jawbone, which holds mystical powers. Understanding that, Roland knows he has to take it with him in case it's needed for anything. I believe it does come up at a point at a future thing, but then they take off from the way station.
It should be important to note that Roland did hypnotize Jake, find out how he ended up there. I don't know why he did not hypnotize Brown. Maybe he did, I can't remember. But he hypnotizes Jake.
Yes. Roland has the ability to hypnotize. He uses bullet, and he does a trick, I think, either between his fingers or, which, the little coin flipping trick. It's something to that effect. But in this instance, it mesmerizes you by moving so fast that you're, I guess you're just taken away into this space where he's able to access parts of your brain that you cannot.
Yeah.
Which is really sick. Many tricks of the Gunslinger. They get the jawbone from the speaking demon, or the demon. I don't know if it's a speaking demon, but it does speak. And then he heads off after the Man in Black. They head into the desert and decide to chase him down. They're camped out one night, and they're, of course, just following the Man in Black. Camped out, and Roland wakes up, and he can't find Jake. And, of course, his gunslinger ability kicks in, and I believe it's late at night. He's able to find him either by scent or by following like his walking path, but it's amazing how he's able to track him and finds Jake in the middle of this speaking ring.
What is a speaking ring?
So the speaking ring is like literally the way to my recollection, because it comes back in book 3, I want to say. There's another speaking ring, which I imagine it almost like Stonehenge. Like there's like rings of like this. If you just imagine
it's like a ritual.
Pillars, like a ritualistic, exactly. Like if you were to see like an open like grassland, there'd be like these tall stones, and inside there's like a pillar in the middle, like a worship pillar, if you will. It's kind of how I imagine it, something like that. And as soon as you go into that pillar, you've basically like the oracle or whatever demon is involved in that speaking ring sees you and recognizes you. So basically, he sees Jake being attacked by this oracle, and she's like sucking the life out of him. So he jumps into the ring, and as he explains it, and they explain this a little bit later too, but the oracles or these demons, they have a gender to them. and they want a man or a woman. And in this instance, Roland knows it's a woman and says he actually throws his like sexuality towards her and like tries to attract her to him.
Because it's a weakness.
It's their weakness. Exactly. It's their weakness.
It's a weakness. Because that's like their primal. Yes. They're acting on their primal instincts, right? And that's not to be overly sexualized. But,
right.
but
well,
the point of
Stephen King, he did it.
The point of the succubus is like they mythical being that's highly sexual.
Yes.
And that's how they kill their prey.
Yes.
Is they know that humans, to their primal instinct, want sex as well, at least to some carnal base of humanity.
Yes.
There's something that is desirable about sex. And the succubus used that to lure in humans and, I believe, kill them. And this may be true or not true with this lore of succubus in a general sense, but they use that. They use the humans to gain more life.
Yeah, I would imagine it's something to that
effect.
Effect.
They're buying more
life
time.
Force. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I can't remember why, but he takes mescaline, which is really interesting. I can't remember why he does it.
Or how he got it.
Yeah, right. Well, right. How'd you get that stuff?
Jake, he brought it from New York. Yeah. He was a bad kid.
I think he does it to like heighten his senses or something, because he talks about, I remember like when he does it, like the grass starts to like grow and like he's really like literally tripping balls on this stuff.
I bet Stephen King was tripping balls when he wrote the story too.
He might have been. He really might have been. It was back in those times too, where it's like he might have been. Yeah, it was like, I think he wrote it in late 70s or something. But so he goes into that speaking ring and takes on the demon sexually, basically. And when he sees the demon, I believe he sees Susan, who will come later. I think he like sees her in the demon in the
Susan,
oracle.
His childhood love.
Yes, I think he says like he
Susanna.
sees her. Like,
is it Susanna?
Susan's the first. Susanna is okay. our girl who becomes Susanna.
OG.
Yeah, the OG. And basically, he sleeps with this demon. He uses the sexual abilities and then sleeps with her, and I think this.
And he's able to resist her charm, because essentially, if you think about it, any other person who's going to have sex with the succubus, would be susceptible to the succubus' allure and power.
Yes,
but it doesn't apply to Roland.
Yes, he's strong enough, and maybe that's why he takes the mescaline even. But but he is strong enough to.
Can't remember if it's like a supernatural power or that may be.
Yeah,
but he's able to resist her.
Yes, but ultimately he does have sex with her, and then gets out of it, throws her off, does something to escape.
He does great. He like outsexed her.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Roland must be really good at sex.
Yeah, exactly.
Because he outsexed the succubus.
Yeah,
succubi.
He outsexed the sex demon. So.
Yeah, he outsexed the sex demon and put her down.
Right. And there's some
hats off.
There's a
hats off to Roland.
Exactly. And some foreboding with that as well. But yeah, so he does that. They get out of that. That's the end of that whole thing. But it doesn't end there in terms of the story. It's really interesting how Stephen King really does a great job of like wrapping everything up full circle. But after that, they continue chasing all the Man in Black.
So there's like, so there is a little anecdotal flashback here.
Okay.
And it talks about how the Man in Black actually tricked Roland as a kid into challenging Court.
Yes.
And so we have a flashback now at Roland.
Yes. How
he challenged. So in the laws of Gilead, in order for you to become a gunslinger, aka the knight of their reality, you go through this rigorous school, like a spec ops training, essentially what I can relate it to. And you don't necessarily have to have, like, guns don't necessarily need to be your weapon, but it's considered the standard weapon of the gunslinger. Mm-hmm. There are gunslingers that are more proficient in other skills that we will talk about later. But in order to become a knight or a gunslinger, you have to basically go through a test. And in Roland's case, his test is to challenge his mentor, Court, who is a badass. Like I imagine him like a drill sergeant.
Yeah,
like he doesn't play.
Yes.
He's very strict. Mm-hmm. He uses physical corporal punishment. Mm-hmm. If you step out of line, like this is like old school, like military.
I
kind
liken
of stuff.
it, like when I read that part, I always liken it to like the Spartans in 300. If you remember
Absolutely.
the movie, how like your trial is like, it's no kid stuff. It's like, no, you actually have to go kill a tiger that should be able to kill you. Yeah. It's the same kind of concept, and they don't want you if you can't do that. Like you're literally cast out if you can't kill a tiger.
Because the job's not meant for you.
Exactly.
You're supposed to be the elite.
Yeah. So it's
That's
like
Darwinism.
literally it's true Darwinism. Either you do this or you're out, which is literally how it works. You're cast out if you can't beat your teacher.
If you did die.
And what you're talking about is if you don't die, exactly. You're talking about a child. If you start too early, you come of age and you choose to take on Court or your mentor at whatever time you feel ready. But if you lose,
you die.
You're taking on a grown-ass man as a kid here.
Who is a gunslinger.
Who is a full-on gunslinger. He ain't going to go light. He's going full-on.
It's his job.
You
He's
have
the
to beat him.
checkmate.
Yes. And if you don't beat him, you're literally cast out as a gunslinger. You cannot be a gunslinger, and you're sent west.
And you die.
And you're
you can die.
Yeah, you're sent out on your own because you meet some people who've been sent out as the story goes on. You don't know. I forget how they say
Were the coffin hunters in book 4, were they all students that are cast out?
Only one was.
I can't remember.
The main guy was.
And one of the OG quotes that I look back on, and you probably already know what I'm saying. One of my favorite quotes in the whole series is in book 4, when the coffin hunters, when they send someone into the Magus, and they're like, comes back and he fulfilled like the coffin hunter job. And he's like, how shall I be paid in gold and silver? He goes, you shall be paid in lead.
Yeah.
And he shoots him.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my God, that's so badass.
Yeah.
Anyways, I'm sorry.
I literally like just read that part like 2 days ago. When
it's so G. I'm like,
they're chasing his back trail.
So dope, bro. Like, yeah. Because it's like, you understand we're talking about precious metal as a currency.
Yeah.
And then Stephen King was eloquently putting like, no, I'll pay you in lead.
Yeah.
Which is the makeup of a bullet.
Yeah. It's so good.
So he's tricked into challenging Court because somehow the Man in Black understands that Roland is destined to do good things. And so he tricks Roland into challenging his master in hopes that he'll be exiled or killed in the process.
Yes.
Because he doesn't want Roland to become who he's going to be.
Yes.
Because we understand that the Man in Black, while Roland was a child, has kind of infiltrated and he's kind of like a wise man of the hierarchy there.
Yes.
And he's trying to navigate his way to become like a powerful political figure.
Yes, he's very much like a worm tongue for Lord of the Rings, like trying to like bend the ear of the higher ups and work his way in, all under the power of John Farson, who's the good man, who is, if you will, he's the true bad guy that they're ultimately going against. But he works for him. But really, in my opinion, the Man in Black, he's like that guy who's seems like a sidekick, but really has his own evil plan he's trying to work the whole time. But yeah, so ultimately he does this by sleeping with Roland's mother, ultimately, which is really weird. It's in those night times, so you don't fully understand it, but it's like he's made her like his side woman, kind of.
He puts a spell on her.
He puts a spell on her. That's right.
So he's like essentially like disrupting the marriage of his parents.
That's right. Yeah.
And I want to say that somehow, and we can discuss it later, his dad was seeing somebody on the side too, which we can get into.
Okay.
So there was 2 evil presences in the city trying to break up this family.
Okay.
That the dad's relationship I don't think is talked about very much in the first book, but we know for sure that the Man in Black is like trying to seduce the mother and break up this marriage and essentially break Roland into thinking that everything. So there's no motivation, like essentially destroy him on an emotional level, everything.
Yes.
And essentially just get him killed.
Exactly. Yeah. And he eventually succeeds enough to piss off Roland enough that he's so angry, which I don't remember what he says to get him to do that. We're getting long on the...
No. The thing keeps going off.
I don't remember what he says to get him to do that, but he ultimately says something that triggers Roland enough to be like, screw this, I'm ready. Court is such a gunslinger that Roland kicks open his door and he can hear Court stirring without realizing it. Court is so fast. He was asleep. Court is so fast that he was immediately ready to basically kill Roland. And Roland realizes, it says in the book, like if he stepped a few more feet in, Court was going to just jump out and kill him regardless. He didn't know who it was. Court's like, no, like you kicked my door open, like I'm a gunslinger, you're dead.
I think Court probably would have killed him knowing it was him.
Right.
Because if you have to think about it.
That's how hard Court is. That's true.
If you think about it, Court isn't just going to let Roland, Arthur's son, kill him, regardless of his blood.
Son, Stephen
I'm sorry. Am I saying
Arthur is their top? They come from the line of Arthur.
Okay, so Stephen, so they come from the family from Arthur, and you'll see that there's like ties between British English literature between Arthur tales. They're like the same thing. Yeah, it's like the Excalibur. And all that
it all has the same all has the same kind of idea.
So I think he would have killed him even though he's Stephen's son anyway, because that's essentially, if you're challenging him, like I would assume that would be an unofficial challenge. Well, like if you're going to challenge Court, like I'm sure there's a ceremonious way to do it, which we see. Yes, but you're not going to get me in bed. You know what I mean? Like he probably would have killed him or at least harmed him.
Maimed him. Yeah, he would have been walked out of there or not walked out of there. He would have been beaten to shit for sure. So yeah, that's the whole thing. Is like they mentioned, like when he kicks open the door, like he could hear Court stirring and he realizes like, okay, like I have to speak from here because if I go in, like he's gonna fuck me up. And he challenges him. He says whatever it is. I think they call you like bondsman. You know, you're being challenged. There's an actual formal way you're supposed to do it. Roland does that. Court, being the hard ass that he is, still has a moment of true like understanding and says like, no. He tells him to cry off, which is the Gilead way of saying like, give up, basically, don't do it yet. And he tells him like, please, I'm begging you. Multiple times he says, look, let your story grow. let the anger build for his name is Martin, the person who's the man in black at this point. Side note,
kind of convoluted.
Yes. Side note, he appears as many different forms. He even says he was called Merlin at a time, and that brings you back to the Arthur Eld whole line thing. But the man in black at this point has formed himself to be Martin, if you will.
Here at this time.
At this time during Roland's childhood. So basically, he's telling him, let this story grow between you and Martin. Don't do this yet. Like, I promise you. Because in Court's mind, he's like, dude, you're not old enough. He's the youngest person to ever challenge Court. Right. He's like, dude, I'm going to destroy you. Like, please don't do this. He actually, and normally, and the way they work and the way Court works, like, you don't get a pass. Like, if you're going to do it, fine. I'll kick your ass.
I don't care if you're Steven's son.
But he has that moment of understanding. Like, I can see that this person has gotten your mind. So he's like, please don't. And Roland's like, no. And he's like, okay, well, you know where to meet me. Roland goes down.
Catch me outside.
Catch me outside. Roland goes down, gets his two best friends, Alan and Cuthbert. In the audiobook, they say Cuthbert and then they say Cuthbert because there's two different narrators between the books. And I don't know. Cuthbert, who knows?
Whatever you want.
Whatever you want, person. I'll say Cuthbert because that's currently on the book I'm on. They're saying Cuthbert. Basically, he gets his friends. They go down and they're the only ones to witness this. Normally, you're doing it in front of the class, but they come down to witness this. But basically, so he gets Court out onto the courtyard, actually, is where they're at. And he says to him, what's your weapon of choice? So you get one weapon in that moment. That's kind of your chance to strategize. If Court sees they have a bow there, they have a bow. Court is expecting Roland to pull out, something, a bow, a bow, a staff, whatever it might be. And instead of all these options, Roland pulls out his bird.
So it looks like the bow. It says bolt and boss.
Bolt and bow.
Yeah, so the bolt you can do with the crossbow.
Okay.
And then the bow is something kind of like a crossbow, but it's much faster.
Interesting. But it does shoot arrows.
It does shoot arrows, but it's much faster and probably not as powerful. Oh, like the crossbow probably has like more of a more
power to it or something.
I'm not a physicist.
Okay.
Or a engineer. I don't know my big engineer
both versions
words.
of a crossbow, basically.
Yeah, it looks like the bow might be more rapid and easier to do.
Sick.
The crossbow is kind of like
yeah, full on. Okay, so sick. So there you go.
I'm probably wrong, but that's what Reddit says. The dark New Orleans of the internet.
Yeah. The cesspool. I love Reddit though, man.
It's as bad as you make it.
Yeah. If you're
curate,
Reddit, you curate your own. You really do on Reddit, which I love.
If your Reddit is bad, it's because you're bad.
Yeah, exactly. My subreddits are all pretty good. I don't get into any you can find plenty of
like murder
death videos. Yeah.
Like tiger mauling videos.
Yeah, dude. Yeah. Or it's like, what the F, dude? My Twitter is like that right now for some reason. I'm like, why? I don't watch death videos. And all of a sudden it's like X. My ex is like that, where I'm like, why am I seeing these like death videos? Ew. So anyways.
So you get to choose your weapon.
You choose your weapon, but Roland chooses his bird. Do you remember the bird's name?
Oh, Lord have mercy.
Anyways, Alex will look it up, but he chooses his eagle.
Is it an eagle or raven?
I think it's an eagle.
Hawk.
A hawk.
David
the hawk. He chooses David. And when Court sees it, it gives Roland a little bit of hope because Court is thrown off for a second.
I mean, so he's yeah.
And then he sees Court kind of steady himself with a little bit of knowing. So he's like, okay, this is kind of his moment, right? So it's go time. David, leading up to this, you see a few different stories about David. He is a hawk, and they discuss the friendship between him and David throughout the books. But basically, if you imagine, this hawk is a true apex predator who has no friends. But in Roland's mind, he thinks there's like maybe a chance, but he understands. He knows he's a gunslinger to be. He knows that he's not his friend, but he has a hint, an inkling that maybe David still does, in a sense, have a friendship as much as one can between master and animal.
But this is his hawk, right?
This is his hawk.
His hawk. Okay.
Yeah, but even still, he knows, like, for instance,
like a hawk's going to do what a hawk's going to do, like a cat.
Exactly. There's a part in the story where he's, I believe he gets David back on his, lands back on his wrist, and he's trying to feed him, and David just starts tearing up his hand because David doesn't care.
Wild animal.
He's a wild animal, right? So even though, he's praying that this creature will have that kind of companionship, he understands, like, no, he's going to do what he's going to do, and you're just going to have to hope that
he rolled the dice.
He
took the random roll.
Yes, earlier in the book, there's a part where he has David chase after another bird and kill it and stuff, and it's really interesting to see. And that kind of sets up that David is like, he ain't playing around. So in the moment, Roland whispers to David something along the lines of like, all right, like, it's go time, like, you're going to die here probably, but like, here we go, like, I need you to do this for me. And he takes off his thing.
Part's brutal.
And he fucking throws David at him, just fly David, and David beelines. If you imagine a freaking hawk just through the air right at the face of Court and just starts jumping, just starts tearing up his
so graphic.
face. And they talk about ribbons of flesh coming out. So of course, this is where Stephen King
eyeball
is
pops.
the king.
Yeah,
yes.
His eyeball pops.
His eyeball
he talks about the jelly coming out of the eyeball. Like,
exactly.
Just destroys
his face. You imagine what a hawk could do to your face, right? Claws and beaks and talons, right?
If someone's like, do you want to fight a feral cat or a small like hawk?
Yes.
I'm going to fight the cat. Even a bigger cat.
Yeah, I'd probably take the cat too.
Because the hawk has an extra plane of terrain.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I cannot fly.
You're right. And I saw a hawk when I left my
All they
house
have to do
the
is
other
come
day.
back and just...
A hawk flew over my head the other day. Like, it was on top of my roof, and I was going to my car, and I was honestly kind of shocked at how big they are.
Huge.
They're huge.
They're freaking huge.
They're huge.
They were down here at the neighborhood. They had a hawk in there. Mm-hmm. It was perched probably like 1.5 feet tall.
Yeah.
Like, it's a big freaking bird.
Big bird.
So when you see them like on the street lamp or something like that, they don't look big.
Yeah.
But when you get there, that thing is ripping out your trachea in one go.
Right, exactly. If it was really coming at you, you would have a problem.
So yes.
Give me the cat for sure, and then I'm trying to fall on the cat, man.
I'm glad Roland didn't choose a cat.
Right, yeah, exactly.
He was under the table. He didn't see.
Right, so in the story, and this is why I wish we had read, just so I could go through this scene because it's so cool. But if you imagine what you would do, you're thrown off. Like, you have a freaking creature tearing your face up. It takes him a second to get his ground. While this is happening, Roland's coming at him. It's go time. I believe Roland comes and he trips him and tries to get him on the ground. So in some kind of way, shape, or form, Court is, like you would imagine, struggling with this freaking thing, ripping his face off, falls to the ground, eventually grabs it by his hand. And as the story goes, he's squeezing the life out of David, but David is such a creature that he's even cutting his hand up. So he's even attacking Court's hand. He's not playing around. He's like, I'm going to fucking kill you. I believe in that moment he lands on the bird like for a second, but he's still not dead yet. It gets to a point where basically Roland is trying to get an upper hand at this point, which he fully gets because of what started here. But Court is still a fucking gunslinger. So at one point, Court catches himself, kind of steadies his mind, and I believe Roland's too close and he grabs his leg, gets Roland on the ground. Court has a stick. It's his thing he has is a stick. That's his weapon that he uses. It's how he teaches the kids. It's his stick. And at one point, he gets Roland on the ground, tries to swing at Roland. I think Roland moves out of the way and dodges it. Ultimately, at one point, through all this fighting, you can just kind of create this for yourself, but Roland escapes, disarms Court in some way, shape, or form. Court's on the ground, half dead. Roland has that moment of like, okay, Court, like, what do you do? I think he even gives him the option, like, to give up.
Are you done?
And Court's down. If you imagine like a person on their knees and Roland's in front of like kind of standing
like
up, like
blood dripping from the face, like hanging off.
Like any normal human would have been done, but Court's Court. And he's like, all right. I think he even gives him the option, like, do you, surrender? And Court still tries to do a quick move. And they explain it like he feints to one direction and moves, and he's fast, but Roland's faster. So Roland steps back, and that's when he beats him with the stick, knocks him out, and that's it. And he just takes Court out. Yeah. And if you imagine, his two friends were there the whole time watching this. So
they've
this
already
whole
posted
time,
on Instagram.
It's already gone live on. Yeah, it's already live on Insta. If you imagine what they would feel in that moment, it's like two kids who've watched your friend you're all kids, you're all very before the age you're supposed to be doing this, and this teacher of yours has kicked y'all's asses, beat y'all up, literally beat y'all.
This is years in the making.
Yes. So you're watching this and your mind is just blown. You're like, holy shit, dude. So they just freak out. They're super elated. They go ham. They're like, oh my God. Roland at this point realizes like, all right, like I'm a man now. And like literally it's like a switch goes off where he like understands like, all right, you're now a gunslinger. And he's still, there's a scene coming up that's hilarious, but he still isn't fully a man yet, but he thinks he is, right? So he tells the kids, or he tells his friends, like, y'all go get a nurse for Court. Like he's already acting like mature, like bring the nurses. You know, I need to go see my father or something, or his father's out of town at this point, but he's like, I need to go get my gun. So he literally was so pissed off from Martin. Martin literally got in his head so much that Roland's plan was beat Court, get the guns, kill Martin, all in one move. Like he was literally going to leave for Martin, go kill Court, beat Court, earn his guns, grab the guns, go walk back.
He didn't even want a ceremony. He was like, I'll just take him out the box you were holding them for me, and I'm going to go kill
Martin.
Then we can have my ceremony.
Right. That was literally his plan, was like, kill him, get the guns, go. Before, and in that moment, before he walks away, Court is on his last breath before he passes out. Court asks him, like, please, I know you did this, but just wait. Let this story grow again. Like, you've just beat me. Like, let your tail grow before you go attack him. He gives him one last thing. And in that moment, it actually calms Roland down enough that he's like, okay, I'm not gonna go kill Martin. Like, he gets through to him in that one moment. So as a reward, in that time, It's very much like the olden days, if you could imagine. So his reward is to go lay with the prostitute and have his first sex as a man. So he decides, okay, I'm going to go do that then. So gets his guns, goes and lays with a woman. They set it up to where he goes to bed that night. He's like, oh, I've succeeded. He's his first championship, champion is whatever. So he wakes up the next day to his dad coming home. So his dad
is all this happening.
This all happens
in this flashback.
This is all in the same flashback.
Okay.
Yeah. No.
There isn't anything too spoilery in there, right?
No, not at all.
Okay,
not at all.
Go ahead.
But it does flashback in book 3.
Because I know there's like a pivotal.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
But it does flashback in book 3, I think. But just to continue on what happens at that point, his dad was out at the time, and had his dad been there, he never would have let Roland challenge court. Obviously.
Never would have happened. That's why the Man in Black had capitalized on this moment. He knew that his dad was gone.
Exactly.
Court will kill him, and then the aftermath will happen. It's like another way just to trash his family.
He wanted to end the line of Arthur Eld right there, because that is the truest line of Gunslinger. So he wanted to stop it right there. So that was his plan. He failed. Roland's dad comes home and hears the story. Roland's off the high of this, so he's like, "Dude, I'm the man. I'm the man." And his dad is like, and the first thing his dad does is dispel him of any thought of that. So he comes in. Roland gets up. And the way Stephen King talks about speed in the book is so cool, because like every gunslinger is fast, and you think, okay, Roland's really fast. And then Roland talks about, no, Court's super fast. And then you see Stephen, who's like so fast that it's not even funny. He walks in immediately. As soon as he looks up, he's getting knocked out of the bed. His dad just slaps him or hits him so hard, knocks him to the ground. Roland gets so angry and upset that he actually reaches for the gun for a second.
Try to kill him.
And he's like grabbing it and he's holding it. And his dad looks at him and he's like, oh yeah? Like, you think you're going to do that? Boom. So fast, without even realizing it, he shoots the gun out of his hand. And they talk about how like before he could,
because he didn't even have it in his hand.
You're right. Before he could even see what was happening, it's just boom. Like, he's so fast. If you imagine like someone pulling a gun, like a gunslinger, and they always talk about like who's the fastest draw in the West.
And accuracy.
At that. Right. So it's like lightning fast, shoots his gun out of his hand. The hooker in the bed runs out of the room.
Yeah, she's like, screw this.
Yeah. Which is so cool, because Stephen King tells this like story about like how he's so great at like giving a little bit of character to everyone. So he talks about how like, before that, the hooker was like dreamily laying in bed, kind of like, oh, what's going on? And then he says in the moment, she has like the mind of a survivor. Like he talks about how like her mind is like, she's a hooker in that world. Like you have to kind of be a survivor. Yeah. And he's like, that survivor instinct kicks in. And like, as soon as she realizes, oh no, I'm out of here. Like just like pieces out on him and just leaves. Cause at first she's like yelling at Steven, like, hey, like he's with me. Like, and then she realizes
shut
like,
up, lady.
Right. Like, oh, I'll get killed.
Yeah. I'm Steven, dog.
Exactly. So she dips out, and then they have a conversation, and ultimately they make peace with it, and Roland did survive. So it's like, I'm sure he's super proud of him and stuff, but.
And I think that's where the important quote that is you see.
Yes. Yeah. Which that comes later.
Remember
on.
The face of your father.
Oh yes. That. So
that, and I think that's what everything kind of alludes back. Like you hear this quote in the book, like, don't forget the face of your father. Remember the face of your father.
Yes.
It's basically saying like, not to say that there's a hierarchy, but you need to act accordingly that would make your family, your father proud.
Yes.
And exactly. when you decide to do things, is it something your father would say that that's something you should be doing?
Right. Exactly.
And so that was like this moment where he was like, he forgot the face of your father.
Yes. Yeah.
That you acted out of line. You were not smart. You were not strategic. Although you were successful, you were lucky. Maybe not lucky, but something worse could have happened, and that would have not have been good.
Yes, exactly. So. And that's the true line of the book. I think is probably said the most. Forgotten the face of your father. You've forgotten the face of your father.
It's like the thing that you say before you condemn them to whatever you do.
100%.
So we flash out. We snap out of the flashback. We see that Roland and Jake are now making their way chasing the Men in Black, but they come to some mountains. There's some tunnels that's revealed, and it takes them below the mountain, which is kind of reminds me of the Donkey Kong levels.
That's funny.
When you're going through the carts.
Yeah, and you have to get in the cart. Exactly.
Like when I read this book, my mind went to Donkey Kong.
That's funny.
to the scenes where they're jumping.
Yeah, the cart jumps. I never made that connection. But yeah, this is also another really cool part. And as we're going through this, I'm realizing like, though I thought to do a show, you need 1 and 2. Book 1 actually does have a lot of stuff in it.
I don't think enough for a whole season.
Not enough for a whole season, but there's a lot of stuff in it.
I think you could appropriately do it the entire show in maybe 4 seasons, 5 seasons max.
Yeah.
And if you just kept it condensed and don't try to drag anything out for money, if you just keep it tight and right,
100%,
and don't try to drag out dumb love triangle shit. Yeah, I can't. It's like the biggest cheap trick in television. I can't stand it.
No. Give me like 8 episodes on season 1 or 10 if you do book 1 and 2, and you could really get the full on thing. But not even, you could do it in 8 really, 8 hour longers and just boom. But anyways. So they go under the mountain. They realize to get to the Man in Black, they're gonna have to go into the mountain and follow him. And they're actually, I forget how long. I don't know if you have that on your end, but how long they're actually in the mountain. They're underneath the mountain for like days and days and days.
Is it days?
It's days and days, yeah. Because that was the crazy part. You lose track of all light.
Yeah, because
literally they're in a mountain. If you can imagine,
they're judging it by their circadian rhythm, which is probably a little affected because there's no light. Because there's no melatonin imbalance.
Yeah, and literally they talk about like being dazed. You know, and they've got their snacks and their water with them, but that's it. And they're just in if you imagine those little carts, you would see old timey carts where they're pushing up the thing up and down, and that moves you along the train track path.
So that's what they do.
They're in one of those.
So the little minor carts are there.
Yes,
and it's almost like it was left there for a reason.
Yes,
like it seems weird that it's like conveniently placed.
Exactly.
I won't question that too much.
Yeah.
Maybe the Man in Black did it because he was like, "Follow me, motherfucker."
Yeah. Oh, he wants Roland to. You realize that he wants him to be there eventually. You think he's giving a chase, and it's like, really, he was leading you the whole time, Gunslinger. But ultimately, they hop on this thing and they're heading down the path. It goes days. Another part that probably could be sped up because they talk about some stuff.
I don't even think like if you did it in the show, they need to spin it for days. I think it could just be like a 2-hour, like like a 2-hour segment.
Yes.
Not like a segment like the episode's 2 hours.
But in their lives,
and the time, like we don't need to be in days.
Yes, it doesn't
unless
need to be
you're
long.
Like having flashbacks or like something is happening inside this that you're trying to tie in.
Yes.
Like, so imagine if Stephen King, like at the end of the series, he probably was like, I wish there was a couple more things I could have threw in previous other books to kind of like foreshadow what's happening here.
Right.
I'm not talking about anything specific, but I feel like shows are a good way to do that, to kind of reiterate after completing a project, reiterating something.
Those things you missed or you wish you could have. Yeah. That's so true, which that's actually a great thing too. Be interesting to see how he does that. If he's involved as much as he should be. So they eventually, they're going through, and then that's when you're introduced to the slow muties. The slow muties. That's a great audio for him, right? And it's basically, if you could imagine a human who's like melted a little bit, right? Because the one thing,
like from like an atomic blast.
Yeah, exactly. The one thing you learn, they use muties throughout the book a lot, but like you'll see a deer or an animal that's got, an extra leg,
like radiation,
an eye on its back, like some weird stuff like that from radiation. Mutation, exactly. So these are the human forms of these slow muties underneath the mountain.
Does it say at this point, or do you know where they have come from?
So they're going along, and if I remember, they start to hear water.
I'm talking about just the muties in general.
Oh, I don't think they say where. What they might mention it.
That's all good.
If there's a listener, feel free to DM Alex on the podcast IG and explain it to us, and we'll recorrect ourselves on the next book. But yeah, so basically, they run into them. I can't remember how they realize they're coming towards them. I think maybe they hear them because it's still so dark. I think Roland shoots a shot, and that's when you kind of get a flash.
Because they all start to come.
Yeah, which is so cool cinematically to think about, like complete pitch black, and then you flash and see these complete scary, like freaky creatures coming at you, basically. So Roland starts letting it go, starts firing
again,
letting it fly.
Toll
2.0, freeing them up. They're moving down this thing. Jake is
Are they in the cart shooting off all the people? Like,
yeah, they're in the cart and they start shooting,
running down Donkey Kong style. Roland
starts telling Jake, "You're going to have to push. You're going to have to do the up and down so we can do this." So he starts firing. All of a sudden, Jake yells. They realize, holy shit, the muties have put rocks in front of their pathway to stop them.
God damn.
So holy shit. Roland's like, "Jake, you're going to have to get out while I shoot." Or he basically explains, like, one of us is going to have to do the thing. Jake's completely petrified. Roland decides to jump out. I think he gets out or Jake gets out. I can't remember. They start moving the rocks. Roland's firing while they're moving the rocks out. They eventually get him out of the pathway. I think, of course, you have a close call in the book. Like, they probably almost get taken out in some way, shape, or form. They make it through the rocks. And that's kind of the big thing. And throughout this time, Jake hints to moments where he thinks the gunslinger basically is going to either kill him or leave him. He's fearful the whole time. And,
right, because he's probably got
happen here.
An okay judge of character.
Right.
He's very straightforward. He's not described that Roland's not a very warm person.
Right. And I think they mentioned, like, after days of being there, they start to see a light at the end of the tunnel. And as they get closer, they see the Man in Black deep in the distance. And he basically tells Roland, I think he says, only you can come. To some degree, he says, you're going to have to leave Jake. to some way, shape, or form. Yeah, he says something like, "You only."
How does he hear that? Does he yell it?
Here's what it is. I remember now. I think what happens is there's a chasm that they come up to where they have to like either jump across or make it across. Roland, I believe, makes it across and is going to go back for Jake. And the gunslinger, or the man in black, says it's now or never. So the man in black, you can imagine they're almost out. The man in black comes through the hole of the thing and he's like, "No, gunslinger, like you have to come now if you're going to come." Like, it's now or never, basically.
And that's when Jake jumps.
And that's when Jake's like, no, when he tries to jump, and he tells Roland he has to leave him. Like, he's hanging.
Yeah, he's hanging on. Like,
yeah, and he tells Roland he has to leave him. Like, you can't take him or something. Because it's some way the man in black forces Roland to, like, not help the kid. If he wants the answers, yeah.
Do you think that he was mind controlling him in a light way?
Maybe. I think more than that, he knows the gunslinger's mind. I think he knows that, like, for the Dark Tower, for the man in black, for whatever his goal is, he will do those things.
So at this point, we know that Roland bails on Jake.
Yes.
Jake jumps. There's a point where I believe Roland catches him, but it's very, like, it's like hand, like they're holding on to each other's hand, but it's like a loose grip, and he's like, it's like a struggle.
Yes,
and there's like this moment where he's like, he basically says, "Go then, Roland. There are other worlds than these."
Yes, which
again solidifies that there's multiple universes running parallel with this one.
So that's a big thing. I'm glad you said that, because if you imagine in that moment, up until this point, they haven't really discussed much of any of the multiverse type of thing. You just know, oh, that's kind of weird that, there's a song here from our world, and there's Jake came from a place called New York, which Roland's never heard of. So there's some weird thing. But then in that moment, Jake says, "Go then, there are other worlds than these." So it's like, holy shit, like, how does Jake know? He's a kid, but he's got that touch.
Or maybe
we'll get into.
Yeah, maybe.
But he knows. Obviously, he came through another universe.
He's aware of something. So
he's
more
aware
than
that is. Yes, exactly. So he literally says, like, "Fine, go." And I can't remember if I don't think he's holding Roland. I think he's holding on or something.
It's like a rock.
Yeah, exactly. And he needs Roland to come help him. And that's when the man in black is like, "No, you either come now or I'm gone." And that's how you see Roland's dark side.
Which is crazy, because it's like, he probably could have just chased him a little longer.
Well, to your point, I think he did that. I think the man in black did do that to torture him. I think he did it to, like, further, like, he is evil and twisted. I think he did it to, like, destroy Roland's mind and torture him. There's also a part, which we won't get into, but there's a part in book 2 or 3, actually, a part in book 3 where Roland's going crazy because of the two things. And I think maybe that was to lead towards that in some way. Maybe that's why he forced him to do it. Who knows? I'm just thinking this now. But
that's book 3.
Book 3, yeah. Roland's trying to coincide what he did to Jake and another reality that ends up popping up, which we'll get to. It's not really a spoiler, but I think that may be why he did it, to force Roland into this, like, mental break, excuse me, if you will. So that happens. He leaves Jake. Jake falls, and at some point, I think they establish how far the drop is. It's a drop that obviously would kill you.
He falls into darkness.
Yeah, falls into darkness.
Like, the darkness hides the base of the fall.
Exactly.
Like, so he falls. And
he falls into,
doesn't even cry. I don't even think he makes a sound.
No, he doesn't make a sound.
I think he just falls.
As far as you know. Exactly, yeah. It just falls into, back into his own win, I guess. But you'll find out in book 2, kind of, or 3, rather.
So this is my favorite part of the story right here.
Okay. Do you want to take it from here? I've been leading the way. Like, you lead here, mother effer.
I think at the end of this book,
coming at me.
This is probably where my favorite part is. It really has kind of like this Men in Black ending. Do you remember the ending of the original Men in Black?
Yeah.
Okay, like about the Orion's belt and stuff?
Yes.
Okay. It kind of feel like you had that brain explosion moment in this conversation.
Oh, sick. You mean how they actually go in?
How he discusses
visually, how they go into the... Yes. So, all of that. Okay. Yeah, very much so.
Roland ends up sacrificing Jake, and he is now kind of coming up to this... He sees the light where the exit is of this inner tunneling of the mountain. And he goes up, and what I can remember is kind of like this little, like, rock clearing. It looks like it could be used for, like, a campsite, and you can kind of overlook and see, like, a beach, the ocean, and, like, other vast land spaces. But he's, like, sitting on maybe a small plateau that has, like, a path that winds down the mountain and into the beach side. But they're up on this mountain, and you could probably fit, like, a small tent and have, like, a little campsite right there. Like a pretty small campsite for maybe like 4 or 5 people is what I imagine in my head.
Yeah, they call it Golgotha. It's like the place of bones. So it's a bunch of bones and stuff around.
Oh, I don't even remember the bones.
Yeah. So yeah, it's like a bunch of dead animal bones and dead bones all around them.
I think this is my favorite part because, and I'm not sure the order of the conversation here, but he is basically telling him more about the Dark Tower. or not too much more, but is telling him that you're more compelled to chase the Dark Tower than you probably recognize. As much as you think that I'm the end goal, I am nothing in the grand scheme of things. And he literally is talking about this world that you live in is literally a grain of sand that is sitting on a beach with other grains of sand that are other worlds. Like how you're so minuscule compared to the grand arcing reality and existence, which was like really weird. And he does it in such a way that I'm really not giving it justice by the way he describes it. It's almost like he's taking you through like a little like time space journey, and like you're like the way he's describing it, it's like you're floating in space and he's talking about like different like aspects of existence, and basically says that like you're just so small. Like there's really nothing here.
Infinitesimally.
You're nothing. Like your dad was nothing. All this is nothing compared to what the Dark Tower is.
Yeah.
And then
I think that is what puts Roland on the Dark Tower thing, is because he explains that
he has like an awakening. Yes, like there's like a change.
Yes, because he lets Roland ask some questions, and then I think he does actually say something like, "Yes, the Dark Tower is like the nexus of all things."
Yes,
and then that is that change for Roland of like, oh, like okay, so I've been chasing the Man in Black, but I want to reach this Dark Tower now and understand like what is at the end of the world, if you will, or at the end of all things. The ultimate. Yeah.
And so that's essentially what it is now. Like now you've got this picture of Dark Tower that sits somewhere in, I don't know if it's All World. Is it All World that it sits on? Or is it like, because the way that they describe it is like all these universes are like laying all together in like a 3D pizza sort of shape. Right. And at the middle or at the core of this spherical development of all the realities that are the center of it is the tower.
Yes.
And we're thinking of like a 3D shape of the tower on a flat surface, but really it's probably like a spherical 3D shape.
Right.
That's great. Not necessarily like,
and to have a like kind of nerd out, which is our nerd companion way of looking at it. I think in the book, they talk about it from like a multiversal perspective. There's certain places you can reach the Dark Tower, but it's not accessible at all levels. So they say that like you can't get to the Dark Tower necessarily from any of the worlds, but some worlds do have access to the Dark Tower. They say that at some point in the book of like, so it's like there's all these multiverses, and like some are connected to the Dark Tower and like
at different times, at different places.
Right. Exactly. So.
And some of this stuff, after I read the book, that there are connections to the other worlds. And there are examples of this in other Stephen King books that he's put in. So it's kind of like Stephen has created his own expanded universe, if you will. Right. So he's created like all of these stories that are involved in the Dark Tower, which is the overarching story of all of his stories.
Yeah, it's like they all live inside this thing.
It's supposed to be like in Pet Cemetery, Salem's Lot.
Yeah, there's supposed to be stuff. I know Salem's Lot does with I think the priest
Callahan. That is my favorite character in his entire series.
I do love him in the series.
His story
so cool.
It's so good.
It's so cool. That's where the Someone Saved My Life comes from. That's where the Elton John song comes from. It's all his story where someone saved my life tonight keeps playing during his thing.
His journey was so compelling.
Oh, so good. So good. He has like, such a deep, badass story.
To go back and read Salem's Lot again and be like, the story.
So that is the character.
Father Callahan from Salem's Lot.
I need to read Salem's Lot, dude.
So after the events
Hearts in Atlantis he's another character from the book.
And there's actually a 4.5. Keyhole into Duma or something.
Yeah.
It's like a really short.
Went through the keyhole. I read. So I need to read the book. I did the audio, and this is no offense to my guy Stephen King. You are the man, but I cannot. I couldn't do it because I got so sucked onto George Goodall and the reader who read most of the books. Their voices. Stephen King narrates that book. Went through the keyhole, and I just can't. His voice loses me. I love him. Great author. Obviously, he's my goat, but I just can't.
It's understandable.
I'm
going to read it.
I will read it. I listened to like half and I just couldn't keep up. Maybe I'll finish it if I can, but I need to just sit down and physically read that one. Yes.
So you just get this idea that the Dark Tower is basically the center of all things.
Yes.
I'm not sure if he says it here, but you can allude to that there's something going on in the Dark Tower that's causing the world to move on.
Yes.
There's like a crumbling of the tower.
Yes.
Well, we don't know. It's not clear.
If I remember the way they do it, so at one point, which leads to that universe thing, is Roland decides to attack the Man in Black. He dives at him and goes through him. And that's when he goes into this like if you imagine like the Man in Black, if you imagine a man in a black cloak, Roland dives at the Man in Black to eventually attack him because he gets so upset and he goes through him and
because
falls.
he's basically told him he's like nothing.
Yes.
And he's already like a concrete thought guy.
Yes.
That when you're telling him something that's so abstract, he doesn't understand. He probably took it as an insult.
Right, exactly.
Like who what?
And he is mocking him too, I think, through the thing. Like the Man in Black kind of knows
he even
things.
says it, like, you have no imagination.
Yes.
I'm telling you this, and you're looking at me with your stupid look on your face because you don't have imagination.
Yes.
He's like, you're good at many things, but this is why you'll fail.
Exactly. So he dives at the Man in Black and literally falls into like all of space and time, basically. And that's when he goes to that universal expansion.
LSD trip. It's basically what it is.
Yes, that Man in Black thing. And it's really cool because he's like floating in space, and then he hears the voice of the Man in Black, and he's like
explaining
all these things. And I think he says like
the Tesseract of the universe.
It's literally like a Tesseract. Yeah.
He's like explaining the mechanics. He says
like, let there be light, and then explodes the universes in front of him, basically. And then when the thing that he sees, I think he gets engulfed in white light. And I think Roland sees a rose, if I remember correctly. In the rose, he sees that it's hurt and that it's like wilting. And that's how there's an understanding of like something at the core of the Dark Tower is breaking. Like there's something, I think that's kind of how it all comes together, which I'll have to go back. I'm sure I'll end up reading the books again shortly, but that's kind of how that whole thing, I think, is understanding of like, there's something at the core of the Dark Tower of the Rose that's coming apart, basically. The worlds are moving on, if you will.
And I think that's, well, so before Roland jumps at him, the Man in Black basically is going to try to show him the future through what is like tarot card deck.
Oh, yes.
And so he kind of sets up to like what the plot is going to be here in a little bit. But he draws 3 cards, and on the cover of the card, we have the prisoner. It doesn't really say what the prisoner represents, but it shows like a person in shackles, I can imagine. And on the next card, it says the Lady of Shadows, and and the other card shows death. But the Man in Black emphasizes that death is not really for Roland. It's just death as a concept. And
if I remember, the prisoner has a monkey on his shoulder who's squeezing into his skin, into his like flesh, and he looks like he's in pain.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, if you know what having a monkey on your back is, and that alludes to what the prisoner actually is. So that's a really cool tie-in how they do that.
Yeah. And I think it's that after that, he says that like, I'm not really your enemy. And that he starts talking about, you're nothing. And then that's when Roland jumps at him, and he goes through all the great expanse. And then he has this trippy moment where he tries to understand how everything works in reality. And then he wakes up to see empty robe, but inside the empty robe where the Man in Black was is just a skeleton.
Yeah.
And then it's presumed that 10 years has gone by from the time that he had this conversation to when he's waking up.
Is it 10?
It's 10 years.
Okay, yeah. I felt like it was even more for some reason, but yeah.
So as a reader, I'm like, what just happened?
Yeah. Yeah. Very, very crazy.
And so to me, I feel like if we're looking back as the book as a whole, to me, if it didn't end this way, I probably would not have read forward. Only because I felt that the story as a whole, there was lulls. There was aspects of the story I did like, but it was the ending that kept you going. It was the mystery box, right?
Yeah.
It was telling you a little bit to kind of tease you like, okay, there's more to come.
Yes.
And I feel like there's a lot of books that don't necessarily do that anymore, that kind of leave you. Like J.J. Abrams, when he wrote Lost, were like the masters of mystery box. They had me going like every episode, like, what is this? What is this? What is this?
Yeah.
And I feel like they did that. Stephen King did that really well in that book, because it's like, okay, this is not at all what I thought it was going to be about.
Yeah.
I thought this was going to be like a Western, like vampire shootout.
Yes.
But now there's like interdimensions. He somehow can go into different worlds.
Yeah. That is really cool.
So that's
up that story at that point.
Yeah.
I like that.
And that's how kind of like the book ends.
Yeah.
Is now he's like recognized he's got to go to the tower.
Yeah, I think he goes to the beach and falls asleep. Like he literally like falls on his knees at the beach, walks to the coastline, and passes out.
That's
and
it.
Then we start book 2 from there.
Yeah, and the book 2 starts off like with a bang. But that's basically it. I'd say that Gunslinger is probably like a solid 6.57.
Yeah.
And when I give ratings for 0 to 10, I'm very strict. There's not really hardly any books out there that is like 10 out of 10.
Yeah.
I just don't think there's ever like a perfect piece of art.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, book 2, I say 10 out of 10. But if I was truly giving it a grade, it's a 9 minimum. I'm sure I could find a fault, which would technically take it out of a 10. But for me, that book does no wrong. It's just it's not. It doesn't have any fat to me. It just feels like such a cool story.
Highly recommend anyone reading it. If you have not read it and you're listening at this point, we just ruined it for you. unless that's how you operate. You like to hear kind of like a general plot and then read it so it's a better understanding. I know sometimes I do that, especially with like a complex book like Game of Thrones or when there's like a lot of characters. I might do a little more research before I read it just because it's too much. But this one's pretty straightforward. I think it's a good book.
Yeah, and for me, I remember when I got into Dark Tower, I looked up, after reading the books, I looked up pods for it. Same thing with like when I get into stuff, I love a podcast talking about it. So hopefully like listeners who are into it find it. So it's not just people who haven't found it who are like, spoilers. But if you're into Dark Tower, we're here to freaking dissect it,
Yeah.
But yeah, so
I would love to have you back to do the rest of them.
I will glad to be back here. This has been an awesome pod.
Thank you.